And today I'm going to be talking about angler groups and their comparisons on different aspects of fishing on Oneida Lake. So for a little bit of background, with this study, we really wanted to focus on kind of a social studies aspect of fisheries. So that's why the human component is very important in fisheries. Humans interact with the health of the fishery and the lake, so we know that humans bring a lot of pollution or overfishing or just a lot of influence on the health of fisheries. So we wanted to make sure we're looking at the human component. Fishing is also a food source for people all over the globe, and it's definitely an important part of the ecosystem. And then also we can use this information that we've gained to help provide information for management and conservation, and just making sure that we're taking the human factor into account. So a little bit of history about Oneida Lake. The fishery has been a really popular industry in Oneida Lake for hundreds of years. As you can see in this picture, that is at Sylvan Beach, so that's in 1890. You can see they had a great catch there. And so in 1956, John Forney started the Cornell Biological Field Station. So we know that conservation is just a really important and rich part of Oneida Lake. And creel surveys were established by Mark Laughlin. We use his techniques today, and that's just what we've been doing since 2002. So a little bit of background of what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to be talking about different angler groups and their perspectives on the fishery of Oneida Lake. So Oneida Lake is actually the most fished inland lake in New York. It's fished inland means that it's completely surrounded by land, so Lake Erie and Ontario are not an account for that. And anglers will come from all over the country. So I was the creel survey technician this year, and I talked to people from all over the country. I think someone who came the farthest was from Arizona, so definitely I talked to a wide array of people. And then some differences in local versus non-local anglers. Local anglers, they're using the fishery more often, they're having experiences with the fishery more often, they know kind of the local area, they know more of the management, and non-local anglers may not know of the management that's going on in Oneida Lake, they may not know the changes that have happened in recent years, and so those are some of the differences between local and non-local anglers. So then I'm also going to talk about bass and walleye anglers, and so that's my other group that we're talking about. Oneida Lake has a very rich history for walleye. People have come from all over the country to fish for walleye in Oneida Lake. I think Oneida Lake is very well known as a walleye fishery. But in recent years, more bass anglers have come to Oneida Lake. I think this might be due to having more bass tournaments on the lake. In my experience as a creel technician, I actually talked to a lot of bass anglers that were in tournaments, and so that was just very interesting to hear from. And so because they are using the lake in different ways, they may come into conflict. So bass anglers actually are more fishing with the shoals on Oneida Lake. They might be in more shallow water, using rock piles, and fishing just a little bit differently than walleye anglers. And so walleye anglers might be trolling more and be in deeper depths of the lake, so they're just using the fishery in different ways, and they have different needs. And so we're going to be looking at what differences that they have in their opinions on management and the fishery. So this is me in the summer of 2024. So that was actually the first fish I caught that summer, so I was very proud of myself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the creel surveys. So the creel surveys were conducted over a 10-week period. So I personally would go to 3 different sites around Oneida Lakes, as we can see here. I went to Oneida Shores, South Shore State Launch, and Godfrey Point, where I conducted 380 interviews over that time span. And these interviews were at randomized times and randomized days, so to help not create bias. So I'm going to focus on a few research questions. Unfortunately, due to the time span of what I've been working on, I can't cover all the material that was asked on the survey, but I'm going to answer a few questions. So my first question was, does satisfaction differ from local versus non-local anglers? I would say that there probably is going to be a difference, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And then what are anglers' biggest concerns as it relates to the fishery? So that's going to be really interesting to see what their biggest concerns are and use that towards management efforts. And then do walleye anglers and bass anglers' opinions differ? So these are going to be our expectations for this study. So we hypothesized that non-local anglers were going to be more likely to have no concerns in comparison to local anglers. And we thought this because non-local anglers, they might not have as much experience with the lake. They may not have experienced frustrations that maybe local anglers have experienced, or management changes that locals have experienced. So that's why we think that they're more likely to have no concerns. And then we also believe that non-locals are going to have a higher satisfaction with fishing. And this may be just because they're traveling outside their home waters, their home lakes. They're going to be getting a new experience, and that just might be more enjoyable to them. And then we also hypothesized that bass and walleye anglers are going to be having different concerns, and we just thought this because they're going to be using the resources differently, and they might have conflictions with their concerns. So the methods behind this study were, I did exit survey interviews, so I go to the 3 boat launches and walk up to someone and ask them these questions. So we asked fish catch information and harvest information, but today I'm actually going to be focusing on these 2 questions, which were on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being very satisfied. How satisfied are you with the overall quality of fishing on Oneida Lake? And then what is your biggest concern as it relates to the fishery of Oneida Lake? And so a little bit about the analysis. So during the interview, I would ask them what their home zip code was, just so we could see where they're traveling from. And in R, we were able to sort them into being local if their zip code was in a 50-mile radius to Bridgeport, and then they were non-local if they were and exceeding that 50-mile radius from Bridgeport. And then to identify bass anglers versus walleye anglers, we saw the target, we asked what the anglers were targeting, and if they were targeting smallmouth bass or largemouth, they were sorted into bass anglers, and then if they were targeting walleye, then they were sorted into walleye anglers. So this is my first graph for you today. So this is the satisfaction rating of local anglers and non-local anglers. So as you can see, their satisfaction rating is actually very high in both, which is a great sign. It means that the anglers are very satisfied with the fishing on Oneida Lake. But we can see that in non-local anglers, they are more likely to have a very high satisfaction, which fit with our expectation. So that's just really great to see that both local and non-local anglers were having a very high satisfaction. And then this is their concerns. So we have invasive species, management, multiple concerns, no concerns, other concerns, safety, tournaments, and water quality. And what we can see from this is that non-local anglers, which is in the red, has the highest proportion of no concerns, which was expected. They may not know the lake as well as local anglers, and that's why they might have some higher concerns. And as we can see, local anglers actually had the highest concerns in management, which again fits our expectation because they may be more familiar with the management of Oneida Lake and seeing those changes. There was also a question actually on the survey that asked if they were in favor of the new walleye regulations changing from 3 fish to 5 fish, 15 inches and larger, and so that may have prompted a little bit more concern with management. So moving on to the bass and walleye portion, both were highly satisfied with the fishing, as we can see. The means were both very high, which is great to see. That we know that both of their needs were being met in this in the fishery. And so moving on, I find this chart to be very interesting. So we can see that the walleye anglers have the highest amount of no concerns, which I actually found to be a little bit surprising, just because a lot of the walleye anglers, they come to Oneida Lake very frequently, when I would assume that maybe bass anglers don't, because it's more of a rich walleye fishery. And we can also see that walleye have a higher concerns with management. The way that we sorted this actually was if people had concerns with walleye regulations, they were also sorted into management, so that might be a little bit why it's higher. But I also found it interesting that bass had a very high concerns with safety in tournaments. So some examples of safety might be rock piles not being marked properly, or wishing there was more signage around the lake, stuff like that. And then I also found it interesting that tournaments were a higher concern for bass as well. So these are some anecdotes. The way that I would input this information was just verbatim. So you can see that the walleye angler said walleye should have a slot limit of 15 inches to 20 inches and reduced to 3 fish. And then the bass angler with highest concern was people with poor boating skills and uneducated boaters. So we're going to end a little bit with this. So our expectations started with non-local anglers being more likely to have no concerns compared to local anglers. This expectation was met. We saw that non-local anglers were more likely to have no concerns, and I hypothesized that this is due to having not being as familiar with the lake as local anglers are. They're not as familiar with the management. They're traveling from a far distance, so it might just be a fun weekend trip for them, and that creates a higher satisfaction than local anglers who might be frustrated if they're not catching anything and they're used to, and they might get frustrated in that way. And then we also see that non-locals have higher satisfaction with fishing. The expectation was also met, which aligns with those expectations that we sought. And we also saw bass and walleye anglers do actually have different concerns. So we saw that walleye anglers had more concerns with management, and bass anglers had more concerns with tournaments and safety, which I found interesting that bass anglers had a concern with the tournaments and safety, just because I actually talked to a lot of people that were in bass tournaments, so that was very interesting to see. And then perhaps walleye anglers were having more concerns with management due to being asked earlier in the survey if they were in favor of the regulation change. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about future implications of this. So it's really great to see that satisfaction is still very high in all groups. That means that the management is doing a great job and that we're doing a great job managing the fishery. And we can also use this data to help make decisions towards management. I find that the angler surveys were very beneficial to me personally, but also we get an inside view into the people who are really using the lake very frequently. And I think it's a very good way to connect anglers to management and anglers to fisheries, because it's getting them involved. And I think going forward, what we'd like to see is we'd like to go back and analyze more of the graphs and more of the questions and use some statistical analysis to see if there was significance. And I think going forward with creel surveys that we can include more social science and formatting these surveys to get the highest and best outcome. Thank you, and I want to acknowledge my mentor, Zoe Oneida, for being a wonderful mentor during the semester. I want to acknowledge Anthony Vandenbalk, who was my mentor during the summer. I wanted to thank Katie Walsh for her help and feedback on my presentation, and the Forney family for funding my summer internship, and then all the staff at the Cornell Biological Field Station. Thank you. And I'll answer any questions. Yeah.
So I have a question. When you did the surveys, did you survey